I don't want to say traumatic, but it was a very big moment in my life that I wish I had never lived, but I did. And I encourage you guys, if you weren't here, check out our YouTube channel. Just search Blue Bridge Church. You'll see it on there. Go and give it a watch. But I want to make something very clear. I love my mom so much, and I am so thankful for her. Just like most of you out there right now are thinking about your mom that is sitting next to you, or maybe passed away, or or maybe they live somewhere else. But we are so thankful for moms. And so I want to preface this by saying I respect my mom and I honor my mom. There was just a season of her life where she had a tough time. And so today I want to continue on talking a little bit about how my mom and I found ourselves in some really tough situations from when I was around the age of 6 to 11. And so what started it was divorce. And that led to just an unhealthy mindset for a short amount of time, which led to bad relationships, which led to bad environments. And so I shared the tough story last week in order to set up the fact that my mom and I went through a lot of ups and downs. So I said last week, that's what happened to me when the story I shared really drove me to my passions and my calling. It didn't define me or in any kind of negative way. But it did affect my mom and I's relationship. That's just me being honest. And she would say the same thing. You see, we had a lot of ups and downs growing up to the point to where I had to check my heart on a regular basis when I would go visit her or she would come visit me to this day. Because you see, I found myself at times being bitter, being very impatient, being angry, or putting up guards because I just couldn't trust her. And so I began to think, why is that? The older I got, I wanted those emotions to go away because life is so different now, and I'm so thankful for that. And I started narrowing it down as I started digging deep into my heart, trying to figure out the root of all this. And I came to this. Those feelings are a byproduct of unforgiveness. You see, these are easily relatable emotions. Wouldn't you agree? Anger, impatient, bitter, or just being guarded with people. All of us in this room can relate with one of those emotions with someone in our life at some point or with God. And so every day offers new opportunities to get mad, become bitter, be impatient, get angry, or start to put up guards. The server forgets the sauce with your meal. I love my fry sauce. I need that stuff. Okay? Somebody cuts you off or goes before you at the four-way stop. I am a firm believer that a four-way stop tells a lot about your character in life, right? Because it just tells you what kind of, Your neighbor's dog will not stop using your lawn as their bathroom. Holy smokes, that is us right now. I don't know what I'm going to do. Your house guest leaves a gigantic mess behind and doesn't even clean up after themselves. Your teenager lies to you about curfew. That was me. This list is endless. We could go on and on. But you see, every day you have a choice. You can retaliate in anger. You can fret in silence. You can get bitter. You can begin to gossip. You can let self-pity begin to take over. These emotions are all byproducts of unforgiveness in our hearts. And they all lead to one thing, a dead end. Also, if you want to get even deeper into unforgiveness, it's been proven by different physicians across the world that unforgiveness can lead to things like increased blood pressure, higher cholesterol, I can't say that word, damage to coronary arteries, and even things like chronic pain and cancer. It can mess with your body. So the month of May, we're focusing on being kind. See, we believe here at Blue Bridge Church that one choice can lead to a marriage being restored, hope given back to a stranger, and change of culture can take place at your workplace or at your school, wherever you're coming from. We believe in that very passionately. And last week, I asked you guys this question. Begin to take your eyes off of yourself and begin to turn them on others. That's the first step of being kind. Today, I want to talk to you about how unforgiveness, keeps us from living our best 24 hours each day. Unforgiveness keeps us from our best 24 hours each day. You see, forgiving others will remove the handcuffs we put on them and ourselves. So let me ask you this question before we jump into the Bible. Who do you need to ask for forgiveness? Who have you hurt in your life? Or who do you need to forgive? Who has hurt you in your life? Think about those questions as we jump into Scripture. But before I do that, I want to point you guys to our information table today that's right outside these doors. And I meant to bring one in with me, but we have free copies of books if you want to take one. And it's a book written by Hal Donaldson, who's the CEO, El Presidente of Convoy of Hope, which this series is based upon. And he wrote a book about his story, his passion, just for bringing hope around the world, because he believes one choice can change a kid, and one kid can change a culture, and a culture can change the world. So go ahead and feel free to grab a copy for yourself, one per family, please, and read it together or read it whenever you want. So they're yours for keeps. So let's jump in the Bible today. We're going to be in the book of Colossians, chapter 3 today. But I want to talk a little bit about the book of Colossians altogether, because I'm only going to spend a few minutes on a few verses, but the whole book itself is kind of what we're talking about today. So the Colossians was a letter written by Paul to a town called Colossae. And here's a little backdrop on Paul, if you aren't familiar with him. To this day, we consider him the greatest missionary that's ever walked the planet, the greatest church planter we've ever seen, because he just impacted so many people. And here was a letter to a church in this town that had two purposes. You see, he wanted them to give up their old life and then to really begin to embrace the new life that comes with Jesus. You see, this church was in turmoil. You see, Paul, but before I get to that, Paul wrote this letter 25 years after his original calling. So what does that mean? Why do I tell you that? Because he was in a different, what do you want to call, state of life, where he was in prison, which he was towards the end a lot of his life. But the cool thing about this church he was writing to, he'd never been to it. He didn't plant it. But what's cool is Paul had such influence back then that when he wrote a letter to your church, you listened. You knew, like, oh my goodness, here he is. This is the guy writing to us. We better listen. So they knew when they received this letter that something needed to change. They needed to say, what is he trying to get across to us? So like I said, he was written while he was in prison. So the town of Colossae, why is this important? So this was about 100 miles east of Ephesus, which was a long ways for back then, which is based off the book Ephesians, which, again, Paul wrote. And here's why this letter was written. You see, in this town of Colossae, there were many religions, many cultures represented in this town. So, for example, there were people like the Greeks. There were people like the Jews. They were the pagans. There were some people that they called barbarians. There were slaves. There were all kinds of different demographics economically and socially. And Paul challenges these believers, like I said earlier, to turn from their past as if their old selves were dead, and to keep their eyes fixed on the goal of new life hidden in Jesus. You see, in chapter 3, if you go to the beginning of the chapter, Paul begins to describe the Christian life. What's it mean to live out this Christian life? What's it mean to live like Jesus, to demonstrate his character in all that we do, our words, our actions, our demeanor? And he lists those first attitudes in the beginning of chapter 3. But then later on, he begins to list the actions in which need to be killed off. So referring to the old life. So he starts off by talking about the new, and then ends it by talking about the old. So the division in the church, why was it taking place? Because that church, those people, those cultures, those socially economic groups of categories of people that were in this body, there was a ton of unforgiveness. And because of that, it created the opposite of what you'd call unity, which is what Paul's goal was for the church, which is what Jesus' goal was for this world, to create one kingdom, not all these flags. So let's talk a little bit about the division that happened in this church. So the Greeks and the Jews had many reasons to dislike and mistrust each other, whether it was a physical representation. So you had the culture in which both ancient and highly civilized, they ran opposite values. So the way the Greeks chose to live their life compared to the way the Jews chose to live their lives were the complete opposite. You couldn't have picked the more opposite sides. So there was already tension there of judgment, and that's not how you live, and there's anger. The Jews were circumcised while the Greeks weren't. It was a physical difference, right? So there was tension in that. What's the correct way? Then there were the barbarians. These people were referred to as uneducated foreigners. The Greeks were not the nicest people to this culture. So much so that they would mock them for the sounds of their language because they weren't very educated, so they didn't have a very fluent language. And they would literally mock them by saying, burr, 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 burr. They would make fun of how they talked. This is inside the church, inside the culture. Then there was the Scythians, and it's a term from the Romans which you used to use to insult foreigners. So going back to the barbarians, you see, they were considered the worst of the barbarians, these Scythians, and they were from the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. So bitterness, gossip, anger, lack of patience, and walls were put up inside this church. And it all came back to one thing: unforgiveness. There was tension in between each culture and in between each socially. And then there were the slaves as well and the slave owners. And the people thought they were above others because, well, that's my slave over there. He works for me. And they were missing the whole point. That the church body doesn't matter what your skin looks like, doesn't matter how many dollars you have in the bank, how much land you own. We're one. But instead it created division because of unforgiveness, because they could not begin to let go of past historical things or current things on how they should be doing things. So let me read to you chapter 3, verses 12 through 14. Behind me is going to be the NLT, but I'm going to read out of the Voice. It says this: since you are all set apart by God, made holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with a holy way of life, compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Put up with one another. Forgive. Pardon any offense against one another, as the Lord, the cross is the perfect symbolism of that, has pardoned you, because you should act in kind. But above all these things, put on love. Love is the perfect tie to bind these together. I challenge you this week, go read the whole chapter 3. It's a fabulous read on different cultures and honestly, how we're supposed to live. As a church body, as individuals, as families, in our marriage, the whole thing. It'll take you 5 minutes to read it. You see, we are renewed by Jesus when we are merciful and kind. Renewed. God's forgiveness is complete and final. But here's the coolest part. It's not conditional and it's not partial. I am really good at partially forgiving people. I'm awesome at that. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. See, Paul's hope for this church was to remain unified. The key to remaining unified is to show compassion and forgiveness toward one another. You want unity? Forgive. Because usually where there's disunity or division, it's because someone's holding on to something. So how can kindness transform you and your world 24 hours at a time? In 2010, let me share a story that's in the book, actually. 2010, Tampa Bay Rays. It's a baseball team, and there was a 19-year-old named Andrew Bellotti, and he suffered the worst 24 hours of his life. Because one day, he was 19, he was in the big leagues, he was living the dream, right? A millionaire at 19, playing baseball for a living, living in Florida, in America, we call that a pretty dang good life. But he made a really poor choice one day when he went out and drove his new car and just began to just floor it. And he lost control. He hit another car, a dad and a husband, and killed the guy. So at 19, here he is now, locked up and in prison with the possibility of no less than 7 years. And I want to read to you a direct quote from the wife. Her name is Lynette Reed, where she stood up at one of the hearings in front of this young man who just months before was the reason why her husband and the father of her kids weren't there anymore. And she said this to the judge: "I think Andrew has owned up to it, and I tried to come out the other side a better man, I just couldn't see where him going to prison would help me or my children or anything else." That's a powerful demonstration of forgiveness. Because of one woman's forgiveness, another life was able to live out their dream. It's time for you to press on, because the opportunities before you are far more important than the opportunities that are behind you. You see, my goal for us today is that we begin to forgive and press on as individuals. Be free. Get back to being kind. It's really hard to be kind to someone that you haven't forgiven. You see, when we choose to forgive, it has an amazing effect on others and ourselves. Many times, it's the first step in living each 24 hours led by kindness. You see, when we forgive others, it removes their fears. It removes their guilt. It removes their shame. When we forgive ourselves, it releases us from that bitterness. It releases us to truly live out love. True love. Let me read to you Ephesians 4:32 out of the NLT. Should be behind me. It says, "Instead, be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God, through Christ, has forgiven you." The cross. So my hope today is that you will not let another 24 hours go by without forgiving that person who hurt you. So I asked the question at the beginning. Think about it again. Who do you need to ask for forgiveness this week or this month? Who have you hurt? We've all hurt somebody. Who do you need to forgive? Who has hurt you? And let me be very clear. When I say forgive, it doesn't mean to become their best friend. I get it. There are some hurts. It's hard to have them in your life. Maybe it was a physical pain that you experienced because of that person, an emotional scar, I don't know, or both. But you can still forgive. It's super hard, but you will experience a peace and a freedom that is indescribable. Is it a current spouse or an ex? Is it a family member? An ex-boss? A friend? A co-worker? The list goes on. Who is it? Only you know. If it's appropriate to contact them this week, do it. Don't wait. Ask for forgiveness. Or let them know, hey, I forgive you. It's very hard to do, but it's worth doing. So how can we all live this out here together as a church, as Blue Bridge? Bottom line, forgiveness is an act of kindness. And that's what we're all about this month, and that's our hope, our foundation becomes as a church, to be kind. You see, today at Blue Bridge, we want to begin to let go. We will forgive. We will ask for forgiveness. See, God's forgiveness is complete and final. It's not conditional or partial. I said that 5 minutes ago, and I said I want to come back to it. And the key part is it's not partial. Remember I said I'm really good at partially forgiving people. I've done it with my mom. I've done it with my wife. I've done it with friends. And here's what I've seen in my own life where it's failed me. You see, culture teaches us to do that, to partially forgive. Here's why. So later on, you can hold it over their head. Which we all know just rips the scab off and you got to start all over again. It allows us to bring back that ammo in that argument, to get our voice heard. I've been guilty of it myself. That's the root of unforgiveness. That's partial forgiveness. That's not forgiveness. So for us who've been at Blue Bridge now for 2, 3 years, 4 years, my hope is that we will truly become a church that forgives. And the last year at Blue Bridge, we've been through some stuff. And we've seen people leave. And it's hurt. We can all think of that person or people in our head right now. What if they came back? What if they were here, they showed up today on Mother's Day? Where would your heart be? Would you be sitting there distracted thinking to yourself, how the heck are they here? Why are they here? How can they come back? Would we welcome them? Would we forgive them? My hope, my prayer, my challenge is yes, we will. Because he did. You see, today I'm going to ask us to continue to do something that I've been challenging you guys for over the last month. Is my hope is simply that we can begin to step out here in this environment where it's safe, where we know each other. Because I'm a big believer in if we can't be courageous and step out in this environment, it's going to be tremendously hard to do it out there. And so today I'm going to challenge you guys again to step out of your seat here in a second. The worship team can actually come back up. And we're gonna dive into some more songs. And my hope that is this. 2 things happen during this time. That we can begin to think about that person that we need to forgive. And that we can also begin to think about that person we can go back to and say, you know what, I forgive you. And here's what I'm going to ask of us. And I'll be one of those people that will participate. Is up front here, I have a bunch of sticky notes and some pens. And when you're ready, my goal is that you come up here and you write on one of these sticky notes. I don't care what you write. You can just write forgive. You can write forgiven. You can write a name. And before you go sit down, you just put it on the cross. And you let go. So when you get back to your seat, you're free. But one thing, be careful, that cross is kind of sturdy, but kind of not. So let's just be aware of that. All right, so let's pray, and then we're going to dive in. So Jesus, we just thank you so much for today. I thank you for a safe environment where we can come and speak freely about you. We thank you for your one true kingdom, God. I thank you for this cross and what it stands for: forgiveness, freedom, peace. And I pray, God, that we at Blue Bridge, we as individuals, we as families can begin to truly forgive one another and whoever else has hurt us in our lives and let go. And we can leave it at the feet of Jesus, of you. And we can also take another step and be able to say, you know what, I need to go and ask for forgiveness because I've hurt this person. Even if they don't deserve it, even if they're not going to receive it very well, God, give us the courage this week to not let another 24 hours go by. In your name I pray. Amen.